Hello, witchy people. You may be wondering why I'm sat here in the dark with nothing but a cup of coffee, a solitary lit candle, and a snoring dog to keep me company. Well, many years ago, I used to run a website called The Haunted ChaCha. And on that site, I would write down the tales that people had told me. Not necessarily ghost stories, just tales of strange happenings, weird goings on in strange places, eerie places, places that were supposedly haunted, maybe. So if you want to hear a few, grab a cup of coffee, sit down, and I'll tell you some. This story is called The Anniversary. But first, I'm going to give you a little bit of background and history. Northern Bridge isn't far from where I live. It's a small bridge that spans the River Itchen, connecting Bitton and Northam. David Lance had the idea of building the bridge after buying land in Bitton and building Chesil House in 1796. The access to his land was poor, and so the Northern Bridge Company was formed in 1796 and funded by Portsmouth businessmen to build several bridges over the River Itchen and the River Hamble and also at Botley. Northern Bridge was actually designed by a man called Mr. Moneypenny. An Act of Parliament was needed to start building the bridge, and the Act was passed and given quickly due to the Admiralty needing the improved transport routes between Southampton and Portsmouth during the Napoleonic Wars. The original toll roads were built in 1799, and Northern Bridge was built as part of this system. The bridge was built from wood and stood until replaced in 1889 with an iron structure, some of which, very little, but some of which, remains today, though in 1954 a bridge made of pre-stressed concrete, the first of its kind in the UK, was built, and that's what replaced Northern Bridge. The bridge ceased being a toll bridge in 1929, and buses were allowed to use the bridge then. During World War II, on the 18th of March 1941, the bridge was quite badly damaged in an air raid, and perhaps this is where our ghost story begins. Gareth is a policeman, not given to flights of fancy and not meaning to be rude or insulting. I'd have to say that he hasn't really got much of an active imagination either. So what he told me one night, I'd really have to believe. The rain was pouring down one dark and miserable night when Gareth was called out to an incident at Northern Bridge. Several motorists and pedestrians had phoned Bitton Police Station reporting a woman was stood on the bridge, in the rain, the stormy weather, and she was crying and seemed as though she needed help. She must have appeared very distressed for several people to have felt the need to contact the police station about her. Now, Gareth just happened to be on duty that night, and so had driven in his patrol car to the bridge, hoping that the poor girl hadn't done anything drastic before he arrived. The rain had gotten worse very, very quickly, and Gareth could barely see through the deluge of water on his windscreen that his wipers seemed useless against. There was barely any traffic on the roads now, and certainly no one was daft enough to be out walking around in this storm. Houses lining the streets had closed curtains, with residents holed up inside, keeping warm and trying to ignore the weather outside. The avenues of houses quickly gave way to a small industrial part of the town where Northern Bridge spanned the River Itchen between Bitton and Northam Estate. The young woman was stood just past Northern Bridge Park, a little piece of green land on the side of the bridge, breaking up the monotony of the grey concrete. She seemed unaware of Gareth pulling up his patrol car near to her as she stood in the rain, looking out over the river, crying. Gareth radioed into the station that he'd arrived at the bridge and, even through the rain, could clearly see the distressed woman standing at the railings. Then he put on his policeman's cap, drew up his collar, and left the dry warmth of his car to see what was wrong with the woman on the bridge. "Excuse me, miss," he called as he neared the forlorn figure in the rain. She turned slowly, as though she was just only at that moment registering the lone policeman coming toward her. "Are you all right, miss?" Gareth asked, searching her face for answers. The woman looked no more than 20 years old, sodden and drenched in a pale-coloured dress, her wet, dark hair clinging to her cheeks as she cried and sobbed in the rain. She didn't look as though she would suddenly jump over the railings into the turbulent water below. She just looked sad, unhappy, almost bereft or lost. Gareth held out one hand as he took another step towards her, and this seemed to calm the young lass a little as she said, "I shall be in so much trouble. Do you think they'll be angry with me?" Gareth didn't quite know how to reply, other than to ask the girl her name and to see if she would sit inside his patrol car to talk to him a little more. She nodded, and Gareth reached out to gently take her arm and lead her through the downpour towards his waiting vehicle. She was so cold, but that was hardly surprising outside in the rain so late at night. They reached the car, and Gareth opened the door to the rear seats to let the girl in. She quietly slid into the car, sitting in the back, shivering and pale. Gareth could only think to himself that he wanted to help her, this desperate young woman who thought she would be in so much trouble with someone. He closed the rear door and got into the driver's seat. The warmth of the car was reassuring, and as Gareth took off his cap, he twisted in his seat to look at his passenger. "So, young lady," he said in his soft voice, "what shall we do about you, then?" She just stared back at him with such a desperately sad expression on her face. "Come on now," pleaded Gareth. "I'm sure nobody's angry with you. Maybe you just need to get home and warmed up." She nodded a little in reply, wiping away a tear with her white hands, shaking a little. Then in a thin, small voice she told Gareth an address. "Is that where you live?" asked Gareth. "With a mum and a dad who's worrying about where you are, no doubt." The girl smiled a little through her tears, gave another small nod, and sat back in her seat. Gareth knew the area well. The walk home would take her a good half an hour at least, but just 10 minutes at most in his car. He radioed into the station again, giving a quick update and the address where he would be driving the young lady to. During the short drive, Gareth checked his mirror every once in a while just to make sure the girl was okay. She was so pale, he thought to himself. He'd be glad when he got her to her warm home, all safe and sound. She didn't utter a single word the whole journey, just sat there, occasionally lifting a hand to wipe away a tear as she wept softly to herself. "Almost there," he told her as they neared the address she had given. The only reply was the crackling static of the police radio. It made Gareth jump a little. "Oh, must be the weather," he thought to himself, as the whooshing and white noise sounds spluttered from the radio in jumps and starts. He drew up to the house, relieved to see the lights on, shining through the downstairs windows. At least he wouldn't be banging on the door, waking someone up. "Come on then, miss," Gareth said. to the woman as he turned to look at her. She sat stock still and mumbled the words she had said earlier. "Do you think they'll be angry with me?" Gareth thought the best idea would be to go alone to the house, knock on the door, and try to get an explanation from the girl's parents. "You wait here," he said, as he left his vehicle and made his way to the door of the house. He mentally went over the words he would say as he knocked on the door. It was opened actually very quickly by a couple who looked to be, in their late 70s. "Sorry to bother you so late," Gareth started, and then stopped, realising that he didn't even know the name of the young woman sat in his patrol car. The couple looked at each other before the man said to Gareth, "Her name's Margaret." His voice was weary, and he continued to talk to Gareth like he was using words he'd said 1,000 times before. "I'm sorry you've had to come here in this weather, to have wasted your time." Gareth was a little puzzled. The elderly gentleman held up his hand to stop Gareth speaking, and then he continued, with words that chilled Gareth to his very soul. "We knew she'd come back home tonight. It's the anniversary, you see. So many, many years, and yet still she comes home on this date. I just wish that someday she'll come inside, come home properly." The man looked towards the car, shaking his head, as his wife said, "She's gone." Gareth spun around to see his empty car. He hadn't heard any doors open or close, and anyway, the back doors of the patrol cars couldn't be opened from the inside. Gareth looked quizzically at the couple again. "She's dead, you know," said the man. "Tonight is the anniversary of her death, and you just drove the ghost of our daughter home." I thought I'd just add this at the end. Gareth remained a policeman until he retired about 12 years ago now. The only other strange thing is that when he radioed in to tell the address of where he was taking the young lady to, one of the operators in the radio room recognised the address, and she had tried to radio Gareth back to let him know what she thought was going on. And she couldn't get through. All she had back was static and white noise, the same as Gareth had heard in his patrol car. I have heard other stories similar to this, other versions of this story, where sometimes the girl is taken to Thornhill. Gareth didn't take her to Thornhill. Thornhill is an estate that was built, I think, in the late 1950s, early 1960s. That night did spook Gareth, and he never liked ever having been sent out whilst he was on patrol to young women standing on bridges. You would think that maybe he would be ridiculed for picking up a ghost, but at Bitton Police Station, this story is well known. Thanks for watching.